our emotions are driven by our thoughts, and happiness is an emotion, just like sadness, gladness, joy, etc., or anger. These are emotions, and they are driven by the thoughts, which in turn create stories in our mind every single day. When we can have presence of mind, when we can train ourselves to speak slowly. My mother used to say, think before you speak. It used to drive me crazy. Now I understand it though. Think, what am I telling myself? This is just BS. Stop it. We will never have those results until we become different, become that change that you want to see. And it's simply digging out every time you get triggered by someone or something. Every time you feel that rage or upset or sadness, immediately stop and say, what's reflected back to me about me? What am I believing about myself?
Sharon Valenti is the founder of the Blueprint for Stress Release. She is dedicated to showing people how to get control of every area of their life. People work with Sharon when they want to create the business and the personal life that they've always wanted, to overcome anxiety, frustration, imposter syndrome, or the feeling like they're not good enough. Sharon is compassionate, kind, loyal, and an expert in her field. And I'm so excited to welcome her back to the Be Better broadcast for the second time. Sharon, it's great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you for that awesome introduction. Every word of it is true.
I love that. Let me tell you something that I deeply appreciate about you and your friendship. One, you are one of the most kind people I've ever met. And I know it comes from a real, authentic place. You are, I've spoken to several hundred people on the show at this point, and you are one of the only ones that consistently reaches back out to ask me how I'm doing. You care about me. We have conversations aside from the show, and you've put in the effort to be more than just a guest. You've put in the effort to actually be a friend, and I appreciate that very much. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I value our friendship. It goes right back to you.
Thank you for that. And I also deeply respect your expertise and your knowledge in everything that you talk about in terms of stress release, in terms of living a better life, in terms of overcoming the busyness and the full schedule, and really taking a look at what we can do in order to feel better about ourselves. And I'd like to start, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with, what have you been up to since the last time that we spoke on the Be Better broadcast, which was over a year ago or pretty close to it? And how has what's happening in the world influenced what it is you're doing and creating and talking about?
Oh, that last piece was very interesting. How has the world impacted me? It hasn't, to be honest with you, because I'm so right in my own mind. And I don't say that in a bragging way. I just choose not to feed into everything that's going on out there, because that lends to the stress. My lovely husband loves watching the news every morning. That's not the way I want to start my day. It's like watching the storms up in your area is not going to help me today. Or is it going to influence my behavior today? So, all these things are self-imposed suffering, trauma, if you will. Why would I do that to myself? So what if so-and-so hasn't become the House Speaker? That is not going to impact how my day unfolds, to be truthful. What have I been up to? I've been spreading the news, spreading my message, and helping as many people as are ready, willing, and able. And more than that, just being really mindful of my own thoughts, my own things that come up, and taking a look to see what just got reflected back to me about myself, so that I can question it and let it go. We have a choice every day, right? We can be happy, we can be not happy. I choose happiness every day. And I know that, and I don't say that in a airy-fairy way. I'm in charge of how I feel every single day. We all are. However, most of us have been taught that it's easier to point the finger outside of ourselves at someone or something else for the way we feel. And that's just not true.
So let me ask you a question. If you were speaking with somebody who said, not even that they said that they're stressed or there's a lot going wrong, but you speak with someone and the underlying tone of the conversation is what's going wrong, what's bad, what's not going right. Like, how can you help that person understand that happiness is a choice? Because that phrase of happiness is a choice, some people, especially, me, even 7 years ago, if you told me that, I'd be like, oh, easier said than done. Like, how can it be a choice? Okay, I choose to be happy. Now what?
Yeah,
Like, can you explain that? Is happiness truly a choice? And what does that mean?
it is just like loneliness is a choice. You can always pick up the phone and call someone and reach out to someone or go out, right? So when I say happiness is a choice, our emotions are driven by our thoughts, and happiness is an emotion, just like sadness, gladness, joy, etc., or anger. These are emotions, and they are driven by the thoughts, which in turn create stories in our mind every single day, all day long. And we are in such a habit of just accepting that, just allowing the day to unfold. It rarely occurs to us, whoa, is what I'm thinking right now even the truth? So, for example, we could plan a vacation, right? And we can either go into the fear mode of, oh my God, there's so many airplane crashes nowadays, and that one just happened last week, and they still haven't found all the bodies. And now I'm getting into a fearful state. But who's doing it? It's me telling me a whole bunch of stories about something that hasn't even happened. How insane. Or I could say, oh my gosh, we're going to do business class this time. Oh, that means more legroom. I'm so excited. Can't wait to see what that plane's going to be like, and what kind of, the food, what kind of food we're going to, what kind of snacks. I can gear up. So same scenario, same vacation. One is, oh, I'm scaring the pants out of myself. And the other is like, oh, I'm creating excitement. I can't wait to get on that vacation and get it started. So that was a choice, which line that I went. And what happens is we have been so conditioned, and we condition ourselves to stay in a particular mode of life. And that's driven by the beliefs that we got mostly when we were young that stuck. And it was as simple as, it wasn't our mother and father or teacher or brother or sister or lover that did anything to us. It is us who do it to us. Let's say, just another example here. Let's say, and he hasn't, this is hypothetical, folks. Let's say I learned that my husband cheated on me, and he is the absolute love of my life. Now, did he really cheat on me? No, he simply was with somebody that he preferred to be with other than me. But my story is oh, I'm wounded. How could he do that to me? How could I make it all about me? If I truly love this man, and I do, wouldn't I want to give him his freedom and let him leave me and go and be with that person? Now, that's a radical example. Most people don't have the presence of thought for that. Most people get into this, let me tell as many people as I can how wounded I am, what a SOB he is, and so on and so forth. It's not true. He's following his passion and his truth. But my storyline is poor me, because I'm so used to playing the victim role unconsciously that it feels natural to fall right back into that. Poor me, oh, well, that's because my mother was vicious when I was a kid, and she caused all these problems in my life, and it just keeps happening to me. I'm attracting this every minute of every day. My mother said to me when I was a child, no, don't touch. No, don't touch. And I, as a child, took that on as, I'm a bad person. I'm a bad girl. And then that got reinforced in school. I got a couple of bad grades. I got punished for talking in class. Oh, see, I really am a bad person. And that stuck. And it carries, it influences life. You keep it doing things that will continue to reinforce that behavior. Now, if I had a mother that said, you are the greatest thing since sliced bread. You're going to be so awesome. Life is a bowl of cherries. It's all wonderful, And I got decent grades, and the teacher thought, I was the teacher's pet kind of thing. We all know that teacher's pet, right? It was a teacher's pet. My life more than likely, because of the different kinds of beliefs I garnered about myself, would have been completely different. I would have a husband that adored me and so on and so forth, because that's what I attract, because that's the energy that I give off is that confident, secure, and sure versus the, oh, poor me and everything always happens to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, those unconscious stories are driving our life in such powerful ways. It's akin to when you have a dream, and maybe you can relate to this. It happens to me at times. I wake up from a dream, and the dream was, something happened that I didn't want to happen, like, your spouse cheating or whatever it might be, and you wake up and it feels so real. But then you look over and your spouse is right there, everything's okay, you're okay, and you feel an immediate wash over you of relief and just gratitude that that is not the actual reality. And if you think about it, that's very similar to the stories, including myself, the stories that I tell at times, that we tell ourselves. If we just observed them and looked at them and told the story in a different way, you could experience that washing over of relief. And like you say, release, ending in the SE versus the F, of telling yourself a new story, one that serves you better. Because that example that you gave of, the husband who cheats versus saying he's a terrible person, he's not loyal, the act of you saying, this was him expressing himself in a way that he'd rather express himself, obviously, and I should let him go on and live and enjoy his life if I truly love him. That's not you just quote unquote letting him off the hook. That is you showing love and kindness to
Right.
yourself. Because what's the alternative? You're sad, you're telling the story to all your friends, making yourself sad continuously. Like, while it's painful to change the story and make a different choice, long term, would you say that it is going to feel better for you to release it in that way?
If you release it in that way, if you don't stay in a victim mindset, yes, absolutely. And you now open the door for other possibilities for yourself going forward. The one statement that is like a litany for me, that is my go-to all-time statement, is, how do I know it should have happened this way? Because it did. That cuts out all argument. There's no arguing with, oh, it should have, should have, should have, should have, should have. It didn't. How do I know it should have happened that way? Because it did. And there's no story, end of any story in that statement. How do I know it should be raining outside? Because it is. How do I know he left me or should have left me? Because he did. No pity party for one there. He left me. End of it. End of it. Okay, get on with my life now. And it's very hard when we are used to being in that poor me mindset. And when I say victim mindset, many people don't even understand that they're in a victim or playing that victim role, because it's their norm. It's how we've been conditioned as children to protect ourselves, to be defensive, to make everything okay. I wanted to rewind the example you gave about you having the dream and then waking up and seeing that your wife is there. If your wife did decide to leave you, in the moment of thinking, what she's going to leave me, what is reflected back to you about yourself in that moment?
That I have a fear of loss, I would say.
Okay. And what's underneath that?
That maybe I didn't do all that I can do, like reading the sign behind you, always do your best. Maybe I didn't do my best in showing her the attention in the way that she likes to receive that attention, which has now caused her to find another interest or just leave entirely.
Okay, so two parts to that. One, we don't know what caused her to leave, so we can only that creates
Exactly.
story. The other part, that maybe I didn't do more. Everybody has a not enoughness syndrome, I call it, going on. It could be, I didn't do enough, I should have done better, I'm not telling you smart enough, whatever it is. We all suffer that not enoughness, and that too stemmed from childhood. We receive a lot of of influence in the way of competitions. For example, let's use sports. So, you're a little kid and you're lining up for races and you're racing against another team and your team didn't win. That team did. So they got the trophy. So it's a double-edged sword. Oh, they're good enough. They won the trophy. It must mean our team isn't good enough. Rubbish. It doesn't mean that, but that's what we are taught. It just means they won a trophy. That's it. No story. But we create that story, right? Oh, they're much better than we are, da, da, da. So doesn't that reinforce that I'm not good enough? And you go into school, you get the A, B, C, D, E, or F. I used to change my F's to a B before I took my report card home, so I didn't get into trouble in school. But it didn't mean I was a dunce. It simply meant I could have cared less about that class, actually, or that wasn't my area of the best. That's it. Math was, I suffered in math because I didn't like it at all.
Same.
English, excelled. Science, loved, kind of thing. And yet we're measured by that. And because somebody else has got a yardstick against us, we begin to measure ourselves against their yardstick and we fall short. Rubbish, that's their yardstick. We can't live up to somebody else's expectations. And we only have to be good enough for one person, and that's ourself. And that's hard to do when we're still telling those underlying stories and beliefs about the not enoughness, right? If your wife left you, unless she told you directly why, can only guess. And when we guess, we torture ourselves. Also, in the 4 agreements, never make assumptions. What stops us from asking for clarity? In this day and age, we want clarity. I help people gain clarity. What does that mean? It means I help you see the truth. And what stops you from, it leads me into something else, from giving an honest no. Somebody says, Brandon, do you want to go out for lunch with me today? And your schedule is jam-packed, but you go ahead and say yes anyhow when you really wanted to say no. Why would you say yes? What would you be believing underneath that to say yes when you know this is going to stretch you thin today?
Probably guilt of not seeing that person, guilt of saying no and them saying, well, they don't want to make time for me.
Right. So believing that you're responsible for how somebody else is going to feel or react.
Yeah.
That's a good one, right? That's a good one.
That's a struggle of mine at times, for sure, that idea of people pleasing.
But think about that's an arrogance, isn't it? To think that we can influence how somebody else responds or interprets what we say or their perception of things. We only can control our perception and the way how about when somebody says an honest no to you? Brandon,
I respect it.
say. Right. So if that's how you feel about somebody else, surely they would feel the same about you if you gave an honest no, right?
That's fair.
It's just stepping back and saying, what am I believing about them and myself that stops me from being honest with people? And they might not want to be my friend anymore. They might not like me. They might think I'm awful. Is any of that true? Is it true that they're going to think you're awful? Is it true they're going to think you're don't like them anymore? No, of course it isn't
and
true.
You're absolutely right, because that in itself is making an assumption of how they're going to feel based on my response to them. Because in a way, assuming that they're going to be upset is almost the same as undermining their own emotional capabilities to receive that message in the same way that you might receive it and say, okay, I understand how they said no. So it's almost as if you're subconsciously assuming that their emotional intelligence is lesser than of yourself.
Right. And that goes back to the beginning of our conversation about choice. We can be happy, sad, or we choose to stay in our own business. And that leads me to the 3 kinds of business. There's your business, and there's my business, and there's the divine's business. The only time, and I said this last time we met, the only time we get into trouble is when we're in somebody else's business. And that's even if it's just in our thoughts, right? So I'm going to stick with the example you had about your wife or my husband. Whose business is it what they do and who they're with and how their day unfolds? It's their business. And whose business is it how my day unfolds? Whose business is it that the tsunami happened or the earthquake happened or anything else? That's the divine's. I have no control over that whatsoever. And if I get myself all worked up about something I have no control over, that's me doing that to me. That's not any external factor. If I am in Frank's business all day long, oh, we shouldn't have done that, so and so, and how dare he, and da da da. Now I am literally causing my own suffering. And this applies anywhere in life. You can be at work, you can be in the job thinking, oh, I didn't finish that report. My boss is going to ream me out. I'm going to lose my job. Look at what you're doing to yourself, right? I didn't finish the report. Hey, knock, knock, boss. I'm sorry. I need a little bit longer to finish this report. You cool with that? Okay, great. Now, no story. You've taken the guesswork out of everything, and he knows where you're at. You know where you're at. And that peacefulness you talked about, the body, like relaxing, you immediately relax because you dealt with it. You're not creating all those stories in your mind, right?
Yes. I really appreciate what you're saying, because there's a situation in my life right now that I've been slightly putting off having the conversation because I'm creating a story. And I think out of the 4 agreements, and you mentioned the 4 agreements, so I want to just mention, great book. I love the book. I've read it a couple times. It's a very short book. It's by Don Miguel Ruiz, for people who haven't read the book, and I'm sorry if I butchered the name, but the 4 agreements are the ones that are right behind Sharon right now. For those who are watching, it's don't make assumptions. Don't take anything personally. Be impeccable with your word, which that's one I forgot about, but that's very important. And the 4th is always do your best. I love that book. It's very important. You obviously love the book very much if you've got the plaque there behind you.
I do. Yes, I rotate things. That book was a bit of a game changer for me too, because you know how our mind likes to argue. We argue with things because we have that need to be right. When we keep that need to be right, we give up our peace. Mm-hmm. When you let go of needing to be right, because in a way, everybody is right. And I say that we're talking about creating stories, right? All day long in our mind. So that I'm creating that reality for me. My stories feel true and they aren't. They feel real and they're not, because it's only taking place in my head, right? It's not actually happening anywhere outside of my thoughts. When I got to the part about always do your best in the 4 agreements, my mind was like, well, what about the serial killer? What about the child? Blah, 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 blah. And I had an instant response that in that moment of that demented mind, that was the best they could do. Now, 5 minutes later, it might be a different story, might have regret. But in that moment, I often think of Marvin Gaye and his father in that argument, shooting him. And now that man has spent the rest of his life, more than likely, regretting that act. Second after, right after he pulled that trigger and killed his son, I bet, and I don't know for sure, it's guesswork here, he said, ooh, I wish I hadn't have done that.
Wow.
But in that moment, that was the best he could do because of where he was at in his mind. When we can have presence of mind, when we can train ourselves to speak slowly. My mother used to say, think before you speak. It used to drive me crazy. Now I understand it though. Think, what am I telling myself? This is just BS. Stop it. Come back. What's the reality of it? I'm going to go have that conversation. It's a simple conversation. I have no idea. Hey, maybe they're going to say, awesome, great. I'm so glad you came to me, instead of the imagine, oh, they're going to be ticked off, blah, blah, blah. Why do we do this to ourselves? Right? It's insanity, and we do it all. And that, that definition of insanity, doing the same thing, we do it all day long, and we expect different results. We will never have those results until we become different. Become that change that you want to see, and it's simply digging out. Every time you get triggered by someone or something, every time you feel that rage or upset or sadness, immediately stop and say, what's reflected back to me about me? What am I believing about myself? And whatever comes to you, see if that's deep enough. What's underneath that? Because in your case, you said one thing, and then underneath that was the not enoughness. I didn't do enough. It's always some form of not enoughness. Anger, a form of control. I'm mad now because you won't go to lunch for me. Well, what's underneath my anger is I'm trying to control you. I want you to do it my way. But what's underneath that? Well, I have a belief that you don't think I'm important enough, and that's why you won't break your schedule and go have lunch with me. And not enoughness. I'm not enough. You don't think I'm enough. You don't think I'm nice enough, kind of whatever it is. Is that true? All you said was no, I can't go to lunch. I just created that whole story. Oh, he doesn't like me. I'm not important enough. Da, da, da. How ridiculous. And yet we do it.
Yes.
You just said no. I said all the rest, right?
So I'd like to revisit, if you will, the concept of the sports field. And let's say you came in second place and someone else came in first place. And, the second place person is thinking, oh man, I lost. That person's better than me. I'm not enough. Like, I'd like to push back a little bit and give the opposite side of this of, is it not a good thing for that second place person to feel those emotions so that they do attempt to improve their game? Like, I think of someone like Michael Jordan, who, and by the way, I'm not a sports fanatic. Like, I don't fully know his story, but what I do know just from other people telling the story is Michael Jordan tried out for the basketball team several times and was told no. And that made him feel like he wasn't enough. That made him not feel good enough, because at the time he wasn't. But it did inspire him to play basketball for 8 to 10 hours a day or more, to the point where the next season it was impossible for them to say no. Can that feeling of not being good enough actually propel people to greater heights and greater levels of happiness? Because I've never spoken to him, but I'd reckon if I asked Michael Jordan, do you believe you'd be as happy with your life if you didn't put in those incredible amounts of practice hours? And I can gather he'd say, no, I wouldn't have been as happy, because it wouldn't have been something for me to improve at, to work towards, and become the best in the world at.
So that's a good point. And I'm not sure if we asked Michael Jordan if his happiness was based upon him pushing himself so hard. What that does is that perpetuates always looking outside of ourselves for that love, approval, appreciation, acceptance, everything. And if you don't have it inside, you will never. Let's use somebody like the Dalai Lama or Gandhi, for example. Do you think their happiness is coming, or what we believe to be their happiness is coming from outside of them? Do you think it's because people love the Dalai Lama wherever he goes, just about, that's what makes him happy and peaceful? I think he's probably he's let go of all the externals, and he knows it's not out there. He spends his time inside getting right with himself. So yes, Michael, the second place person, in that feeling not good enough, it might propel them two ways. It might propel them to give up and say, oh, I can't do it. I just give up. Or it might say, I'm going to show you next time, I'm going to do that. But there's always that sense of lack. There's always that sense of pushing harder and harder and harder. And you get to gold medal, you get to first place. And then what? Oh, I got to do it again at the next Olympics. I got to do it again at the next sports event. And what happens if you fall short? It's a constant internal battle with yourself, because I'm the one that first place doesn't mean I'm good enough, because it's not that position that's determining how I feel about myself. It's me determining how I feel about myself.
So I'd like to give you another example, but this one is a personal example. Like, in this is like a hidden memory that you've unlocked for me just right now. So I remember before I ever gave presentations to people, which is, if there's any skills that I have, I'm not very skilled at many things, but I will say that I'm skilled at delivering an impactful presentation. And that's something that I pride myself in, something that I've improved in, because at the beginning, it was not that. In the beginning, I wasn't able to keep people's attention. In the beginning, I wasn't able to tell a story in a way that would actually cause a positive impact for people. But I remember at the beginning, before I even knew that I loved speaking and helping people in that way, I watched a presenter. His name was Dane. I forget his last name, but he was energetic. He was powerful in front of the room. He spoke with such poise and humor, the way he moved around the room. I'll always remember his presentation. After watching him, I said two things, probably more, but two things stood out to me. The first was, wow, this man is an incredible presenter, and the way he captivates the audience. And the second part of me was also envious in a way of his ability to have the attention of everyone while helping people at the same time, but also a feeling of, I can't present like that. I can't speak to people like that. And that feeling of not enough propelled me to improve my game. It propelled me to join the Toastmasters club near me years and years ago. It propelled me to, speak to teams and struggle at the beginning, but get better and better and better. And I was looking outside myself at people who were better at me in this craft. And I believe that at the same time, that helped me improve. And now I'm not still saying, wow, sometimes we'll be honest. Sometimes like I look at people, I gave a presentation yesterday. And I think it went very well. It was a full keynote workshop, 60, 70 minutes for a group of 25 people. And it's intriguing, the stories we tell ourselves, because I left thinking like, I had that high from the presentation. My heart rate was going, I'm driving home and I'm thinking that went really well. And then immediately the story came in, but it wasn't as good as Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins does it better. When Tony Robbins was my age, he was a much better presenter and speaker than me. And I immediately noticed that now. And again, I wouldn't have noticed it before, but I noticed that and I think, wow, why did my mind immediately compare myself to somebody else? And I was able to push it aside, because then I realized he has different life experiences. His story is very different than mine. I cannot compare myself to another human being. But at the same time, that comparison at the beginning of my speaking journey helped me to become a better speaker, that looking outside. And as an example, with the Dalai Lama, like what you mentioned, I looked him up because I'm not very familiar with the Dalai Lama, but he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his nonviolent struggle for the liberation of Tibet. And he consistently advocated policies of nonviolence, even in the face of extreme aggression. Well, that policy is something that is their business. It wasn't his business what was going on in Tibet. Even, he has a major concern for global environmental problems. That's the divine's business, but he did insert himself into it, and he's known for his concern for those problems. So I love what you're saying. And at the same time, I invite you and I push back just to see where the communication can lead us. But it seems as if the Dalai Lama was concerned with things outside of his business at times.
And I'm not saying that he's not in somebody else's business. I'm saying he's got a lot of peacefulness inside, and his peacefulness comes from inside, not from the externals. So yes, there's the three kinds of business, but it's our choice what we get involved in, right? I wonder, in his way of helping in whatever peaceful way he can. It's like Martin Luther King and his wife actually went out to Gandhi and spent time with Gandhi to learn peaceful solutions, because they were intent on that. That doesn't mean that he still wasn't surrounded by violence and had to deal with that in whatever capacity. I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect person in the world yet. And I want to go back to your point about comparing. The worst thing we can do is compare ourselves to another, because we will always fall short. And that comes back to just being good enough for ourselves. So there's nothing wrong with learning and wanting to perfect our craft at all. But we're still the ones who are judging whether it's perfect enough. And to your point, you did a wonderful presentation yesterday, and still that old conditioning seed of doubt came in, and darn it, I compared myself to somebody else and I know better than that. Yeah. It reminds me of Louise Hay talking about the very first time she spoke on stage, and she was truly a mindful person. And she came off the stage and she knew she could have done things differently. And what she said to herself was, that went well. Next time it'll go better. That was it. No beating ourselves up. Hey, the very first speech you did, and you feel it didn't go well, you learned from that. And then we all find mentors. We all find people who have qualities that we admire. And the only way we could see that in another is if it lives inside of us. It's impossible to see it if we don't have it inside of us, I promise. And so what you admired in that person, you just found a way to bring it out of yourself. Did that come from feeling like I'm not good enough, or did that come from a desire to be the best version of yourself you could possibly be? My guess is it really brimmed up because you have a strong desire to be the best version of you. In my opinion, every time I see you in LinkedIn and you're chatting and stuff, you're always showing up as the best version of you. We can't.
I try.
No such thing as trying. We either do or we don't. You always do, Brandon. Believe me, you do. Don't doubt yourself. Because back to the 4 agreements, we can only, and what I said earlier, we can, every minute we're showing up the best we can. 5 minutes from now, tomorrow might be better than what I was today, but right now is my best. Why would I compare? Why would I put myself down? I know I'm doing the best I can. You're doing the best you can in every moment, which includes some of the thinking that takes us out of alignment. But the next time we get triggered by anything, whatever emotion, find out, what are you believing about yourself in that moment? It has nothing to do with the person outside. You know, your wife could sneak up behind you now and say boo, and you could like jump and, oh, you scared me. Not you. Your wife just said boo.
She does that a lot.
Okay, she just says boo. No, your mind just saw whatever, the boogeyman, the ghosts, whatever it is. You scared yourself with your own thoughts. All she said was boo, right? We see people out every day and we judge. People judge, not people watch. And we're like, oh, what were they thinking with that outfit? You know what? Look at that shirt.
So how do we move away from that? How do we move from seeing someone, and because, you know, generally what we tend to think about others, we think about ourselves. How do we move from the judging to the watching and observation instead?
Move into acceptance. Why do they have to live up to my standards? I accept this is who you are. I'm either going to stick with you or I'm going to say, I don't choose to be around you anymore. It's their business how they act. And if I accept that and stop trying to make them live up to my standards, which are impossible, I can't even live up to my own standards sometimes, you know? So how can I expect somebody else to do that? I say to my husband, oh, you don't love me. Whose business is it who he loves? Not mine. But if I accept he's who he is, I can either take it, leave it. It's a choice. And so look around you and move into acceptance. It's not my place to change someone else or something else. It's my place to change me and my perception of things. You know, we all of us have been in the same one particular situation more than once. And one day we can have this perception of it, and another day, another perception. Driving on the road is a perfect example. Out, you know, mindset is like, oh, I'm out for a leisurely drive, and somebody flies in front of me and goes down the road. Another day, I'm in a bit of a hurry too, and this same fool drives in front of me, and now I'm calling him a fool. Now I've seen the accident happen, everything else. All that happened was the story I just got about that moment in my mind. That's it. Same situation, same highway, same everything. Just my perception. And that's all it is perception. If that same person cut me off again, okay, so he must be in a hurry. That's it. No story. No story. That's it. Be aware of the stories.
So I'd like to ask you, because we talked about this before we went live, and I was like, no, we have to talk about this on the show. So we won't mention names, but let's talk about the person. And by the way, I do see myself as this a lot of the time, the person who is doing more. We talked about someone who has a giant platform and, you know, a quote unquote, very successful person in terms of however you want to see that. We don't know them. We don't know the truth, but from what we see, they're very active. They're always trying to help people. And, sometimes maybe even to the extent of they're so stressed because they're doing. Now, I think about myself, and let me tell you, Sharon, if I'm not, and I know this is a story too, and I'm about to say the story out loud, but if I'm not hosting these shows and having these conversations, if I'm not feeling like I'm making a positive difference by releasing these shows and doing the presentations like I did yesterday and performing at my best in my sales career, then I become depressed. Like, as an example, when I am sick, I feel bad, not because I'm sick, but because I'm not able to do the things that bring me joy. Like, these podcasts bring me joy. Doing my best brings me joy. Being an achiever brings me joy. Doing, that brings me joy. If I'm not always working on something in some way creatively, then I feel sad. So let's talk about this person or people, because there's a lot of people listening who are achievers. I asked people in the room yesterday, raise your hand if you would consider yourself an achiever. And literally 90% of people rose their hand and laughed at the same time. Let's talk about that achiever. If that person wasn't doing, what if they were sad when they weren't doing? What if they felt depressed when they weren't doing? Like, is there a balance between doing and being peaceful? And what is that balance?
So I'm going to start with you first and then talk about what we mentioned earlier. If you're not doing, and you say you feel depressed, what are you believing about yourself in that moment if you're not doing?
I'm believing that I'm not adding the value and becoming more of a valuable person if I'm not creating, and I feel that I'm wasting time.
So you're wasting time.
Yeah.
If you're not creating and you're not doing, you're wasting time. Can you know 100% for sure that's true, that you're wasting time? Who taught you you're wasting time?
And I'll answer that question in another roundabout way, which is, what is the alternative to the doing? Would it just be sitting? Would it be stillness? Because you not, and I know there's people like Robert Greene, I think about, from the 48 Laws of Power. He spends the first hour of his day just in a meditative state of just thinking, letting the thoughts come in, letting the thoughts go out. But what's the opposite of the doing? Is it stillness? Is it just being?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what value will that create? What good will that create?
Why don't you try and then come back and tell us?
Is there a balance though between, because a lot of people will hear that and they'll be like, well, that's laziness, right? You're not doing anything. Like, what did you do today, honey? Oh, I sat and I didn't do anything because I know that doing is the antithesis of peace.
So I would say it depends on your reason for doing it. If it's because it truly makes you feel alive and it's not tied into let me rewind. So the laziness, the sloth-like, all those things that we heard, we have been conditioned to believe, and this is mostly here in the US, we've been conditioned to believe if we're just sitting around, not watching TV, but if we're just sitting, for example, meditative, contemplating life, whatever, that's wrong. And that's worth looking at. If we were to go to another country and culture where they are taught that sitting in a meditative state and allowing whatever to arise, that'd be perfectly acceptable. But in a lot of countries, we are taught, don't be so lazy. Gone are the days of working for a company for 40 years and getting a pension at the end of it, and so on and so forth. That was generational. And some of that generational stuff is still carried into today. That if we're not constantly in motion, we're lazy. What the heck is lazy anyhow? What does that mean, to be lazy? If, on the other hand, those super high achievers that we were talking about before we came on, they're still trying to prove to somebody that they're good enough. It's somebody from their past that said, you're lazy, you'll never amount to anything, all those other crappy things that we got told when we were children, some of us, many of us, heard. And we've either been proving them right or striving to prove them wrong. And it's an endless thing because you said yourself, even though you know it went well, there was still that, oh, but it wasn't as good as the other person. It wasn't good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not as good as Tony or this one or that one. Rubbish. To your point, we're all individuals. We all have our own style. Tony's up there bouncing around and screaming and yelling and rah-rahing and getting in people's face like this. That's not your style. That's not my style either. That works for him. The other high achiever, constantly, oh, it's just here. I've got a new planner. Buy it here. I've got it rolling out a new program. I imagine, even though he's a high energy person, it's exhausting at times. And when will he ever feel he's good enough? When will he ever see he's arrived? He is that well-known. He is that famous. He is charging an arm and a leg for coaching. When is enough? And if I charge $100,000 for a coaching session for a year long, that doesn't mean I'm better than anyone. It just means I charge more than anyone. Am I giving value? Only the person receiving it will know if it's value. Only your audience will know in your presentations whether what you're giving is a value. And yet you're judging yourself. That person's judging themselves. Michael Jordan, it inspired him to become the best version of himself. Does he feel happy? I'd love to have that conversation with him. What brought you happiness? We know it's not the money. I think I shared the analogy that I heard. It was an interviewer talking to an entrepreneur and said to the entrepreneur, why do you want to make all this money? And the guy looked at him like, are you crazy? And he said, so I can spend time with my family. Well, why do you want to have time with your family? Well, so I can be with my kids more. Why do you want to be with your kids more? Well, so they think I'm a good dad. The problem is not making more money. The problem is he doesn't think his kids think he's a good dad. Insanity. But when you get down to it, that underlying belief, you could take away all the money in the world. If his kid said, Daddy, I love you, you're the best daddy in the whole wide world, would that make him feel like he's the best? I don't know. That's his kids telling him something. It's still, if it doesn't erase that feeling inside of him, he's the only one that can do that. And he's the one that's got to figure out how to do it by questioning, do my kids think I'm not a good dad? Am I not a good dad? Mm-hmm. No, it's just a belief you got about yourself, buddy. It's not true. I see other things, other high achievers, telling people, well, count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ooh, problem solved. Anxiety's gone. Rubbish. I say rubbish to that. You haven't dealt with what caused the problem in the first place. Deal with the problem. It's gone. You don't need to do any counting sessions or anything else. Get confidence. Okay. Great. You tell me to get self-confidence. How do I do that? Well, Dale Carnegie, I love his suggestion. He said, go and do the thing that you fear the most. Do it one time. And then you say, oh, wasn't what I was thinking it to be. Do it again and do it again, do it again till you're not even thinking about it anymore. You're just doing it, right? We terrorize ourselves with our thoughts, with our beliefs. We're the ones that hold us back. We compare ourselves to others. Why? We're not the others. We are just us. We're unique in this big picture. Stay there.
So to bring this full circle, because I love how this conversation has gone, by the way, this has been one of my favorite conversations on the show. And I don't say that every time. Everyone who watches religiously knows that. It's been one of my favorites because I wanted to fully understand, and still, there's so much more we could talk about this and go deeper into, but I wanted to understand more of your concept of self-worth and being enough. And I feel that I've scraped more of that surface. And I know this has been helpful for other people too. But let's talk about, okay, so if we're not releasing the journal or releasing the new program or doing the thing, then where are we spending our time in order to experience the most joy? Where do you advise people spend their time if it's not in the doing to impress other people? How should we go about living our life?
Doing, literally, it's so simple. Just doing what makes you feel good in any given moment. And if that's sitting on the couch or if that's putting out a podcast, if that makes you feel good, how many times have we pushed ourselves to do something that we really don't want to do? And you plaster on the phony smile and you show up, but internally you're disliking every moment of it. Why would we do that to ourselves? And yet we do. And so then it comes, what am I believing about me that's pushing me? This comes back to the honest no. Why am I doing this? Well, because Brandon might never speak to me again. Every night invite me to a show. Da, da, da. I don't know that. Hey, Brandon, I'm really not into this today. Can we postpone it for another day? I really want to show up as my best self. Are you okay with that?
Yeah,
Oh,
totally. Thanks for telling me. Thanks for telling me, and not just not showing up like happens sometimes.
or showing up phony, or showing up just half inside. I mean, that how you feel inside shows up in your energy that you're giving off, right? If you're feeling, if you've had an argument with someone and you come on your show, do you feel you're showing your best self? No. Do it another time. Just postpone it. Your guests will be okay with that. Hey, I'm just having a bad day. Everybody has a bad day. Or, hey, I'm having a great day. It's on. Let's go, right? Total different energy, right?
So what if what brings you joy? What if what brings you joy is, I love playing video games and I just want to play video games because that's what brings me joy in this moment and many of my moments. But the bills are due. You've got the mortgage. You've got the job. Like, does this make sense? Like, because video games bring me joy, but I don't always do that because I realize I have bills to pay. I have a family to provide for. I have people to serve. Like, what do you say to that?
I'm going to say something so basic, and I know people are going to, well, I don't know anything. I don't want to be presumptuous. I know what I might have said once upon a time. Let's say you wanted to be a travel agent, or I'm sorry, you want to travel and you love traveling, but you don't have the funds to do it. And yet you're passionate about traveling. Go be a travel agent. They'll pay your way. You'll get to see the world that way, and you'll meet all kinds of new people. You want to play video games all day? Great. How could you turn that into a living? There are so many companies out there that are looking for people to play around with their video games, to give feedback so that they can perfect them. Do something you love instead of something that doesn't inspire you to your greatest heights. But whatever you do it for, I just like, right, wrong, but do it for honest reasons, not because you believe you're not enough or as good as them, or forget them. Just on you, what makes you feel good. I had a friend who had a stepson who would work for 6 months, quit the job, and live on the money made for 6 months. And she hated that. She thought that was so awful. And I thought, good for him. He gets 6 months off every year, and then he just goes and gets another job, and 6 months more, makes enough money. And gosh, that's our Sunday is today. And we keep postponing it and postponing it. We're believing something that's keeping us from postponing living today. Those bucket lists, forget the bucket list. Do it now. Do it now. I didn't want to wait. Do it now. Maldives is on my list. I have my sights set on the Maldives now. 2 people I know have gone to the Maldives. I'm like, that's next vacation for me. And then I don't know how I'm going to get there. Once upon a time, somebody was telling me they'd lived in India. I thought, wow, that's so cool. I'd love to visit India. I let that go. Fast forward 5 years, I think it was, the opportunity of a lifetime to spend a month in India came up at a price I could never have imagined to be so affordable. We had one of the most memorable months of our life. Wow. And that trip, just, I'm going to go to the Maldives. I don't have to know how, when, or where. I trust it's going to happen because I have seriously set my sights on that now and let go of the how, when, or where. Brandon, you're good at what you do with the podcast. And in that same breath, are you doing it truly for the love of it? Or are you doing it, and you don't have to answer this, just something to contemplate. Are you doing it because you're still believing you got to prove something to someone somewhere in your past? Forget yourself. Just did someone in your life somewhere, one incident happen that started that perpetual belief of, he'll never think I'm good enough. I never get it right. They'll never think, whatever. Plants that little seed, and then we push ourselves and push ourselves and push ourselves, and we're never content because we're always trying to please something outside of ourselves rather than just do it for the love of doing it. You love video games. How could you turn that into a living? There's ways. You just got to, every time we ask ourselves what, our mind automatically goes into solution mode. What can I do to bring that into my life? What can I do? Just what? But mostly, not mostly, always question what stories you're telling yourself. I'm feeling down. Why? What was I just telling myself? What am I believing? Is it even true? No, it's just crap in my head. That's all it is. It's just get up, go for a walk. If you're feeling, Abraham Hicks, if anybody follows Abraham Hicks, says, look around the room. When you're feeling in one of those moments, focus on something. The color that I can see, like a purple behind you, I can be like, wow, that's the coolest shade of purple I've ever seen. That just completely got me out of that mind track that I was just going. This is when I say therapeutic mindset coaching. Mindset is our set of beliefs. And we know we can change our beliefs. Joe Dispenza talks about this all the time. Through meditation, you say sitting quietly, through meditation, what arises then begins to change those neural pathways in our brain. And it's like total immersion. When you read enough of the same kind of books or you attend enough of the same kind of classes, your mind starts tracking in a different way. New neural pathways are created and the old ones fade and die away. And this is what creates change. When you start looking for what am I believing about myself in that moment, I just got so mad at that person. What was reflected back to me about me? And they get still with it, find out if it's even true. I mean, I don't know what that person's thinking of me. I'm just imagining that. I'm just saying it. It's really what I'm believing about me. I'm believing I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable enough. I'm not likable enough. I'm not important enough. It's me doing it to me and nobody else. And I know people might want to argue with that. I blame my mother and my father for all my woes for a very, very long time, until one person said to me, how long are you going to keep blaming them for how you are today? And it was like, whoops, you're absolutely right. I'm an adult. I have choices now. I've always had choices. I'm just now seeing it, kind of thing. But it was a habit to be the victim, the poor me. And I would tell the woeful story to anybody who would listen until learn differently. And it's like misery loves company. You start telling those stories and you'll find people who are just, oh yeah, my parents even worse. When you think about this, when you talk about people pleasing, when we're listening to someone and really listening, we're just listening. If you're talking and you're doing it now, and I'm nodding my head, or I'm doing that unconsciously because I want you to believe I'm paying attention to what you're saying and I'm relating to you, rather than just, so you're just nodding your head. It is. What about just sitting and listening? I don't need you to like me. There isn't anything that anybody has that I want or need that I can't give to myself. That takes the pressure off of everybody. Why would I put that burden? If I'm nodding my head, I don't know if you're going to like me or not. And I'm just, look at me, please like me. I was like, I can't control your perception of me. Only you can. And you can't control my perception, but I'm trying to influence it. Look at me, I'm listening. I mean, it's funny after a while when you become aware of what you're doing and without understanding why you're doing it. Then when you understand why you're doing it, you're like, oh, doing it again. Just listen. They don't need to nod my head, or I don't need to say, with the eyebrows, that little bit into it. It doesn't matter. People are so engrossed in what they're telling you. That's all that's important in the moment. They're not thinking, oh, let me like Sharon kind of thing. They're just telling their story. So let me just be an attentive listener. Right?
We might need a round 3 sometime soon, Sharon. I love where this is going, because I've never thought about that before, what you just said about the head nodding. And I'll tell you where I know where it comes from. It comes from being in sales since I was very young, well, 18. And
They talk about
in
and
order
agree.
for my client to know, when I'm influencing them to buy a specific
Right.
phone or whatever, like if I was just stonewall, just looking at them while they talk to me, like I wanted to guide the conversation in a specific way. And it definitely is something that became an unconscious habit for me. And it is because I want people to know that I'm listening to them, and I want them to feel that I'm taking in and understanding what it is they're saying. But then you watch people like Lex Friedman, who is a fantastic podcaster, listener in general, and he doesn't move at all when people are talking to him. Like he's just him. But him and I are very different too. Like he's
Yeah.
very analytical. He's like an engineer brain. He's very monotone with the way that he talks, which some people love that. And obviously
Right.
not some, like millions who listen love that. But
Right.
that's not who I am. I am a very, like, if you were sitting with me, and I know this is a story in itself, although this is the way that I am. Like I'm very animated. I'm always moving my hands, my arms. When it's difficult for me at times to sit still. My legs are bouncing. Like my wife is sometimes like, stop bouncing your leg like that. And it's like, oh, I didn't even know I was doing it. So
Right.
again, we could talk about that for maybe that's episode 3, how to be aware of that, those patterns, what they're doing to us. And
Right.
but let me ask you this, because I want to respect your time, and
And
we're,
yours.
we're already over, which is fine for me, but I don't know if that's fine for you. But I do want to ask you, tell me about your blueprint for stress release, and what it is, who it's for, and where people can find it. Because I know people are loving this conversation, and they want to know what you're up to and what you can give them. So what does that look like?
Thank you. So Blueprint for Stress Release is sort of the parent, the LLC. And I created a self-study course. I know people's time is often constrained. I also don't, my intention was for it to be a course that's actually utilized, not something that we buy and then put on the shelf. It's 6 short lessons. And the very first lesson gives instructions on, and at the end of it, at the end of the exercise, you have now brought to surface 95% of your underlying beliefs. You will have also seen how they have been repeatedly showing up in your life and continue to drive your life. And then you will learn in the next 5 lessons and in lesson 1 what you need to do, a very simple process of how to question those and begin to let them go, how to track them back to the earliest time and in today's moments when it's surfacing. And I think it's nothing short of brilliant. It really can be life-changing. I also have a separate coaching business, and that falls under Is It True? And you can find that at isittrue.com for private coaching, and blueprintforstressrelease.com. And that is SE on the end, not F. It's stressrelease.com. And the course is out there. And of course, to reach me, LinkedIn is probably the best and most efficient way to get in touch with me directly. I have thoroughly enjoyed today. You were a delightful host, and I love playing with you in this too, because nothing like real life examples, right? This isn't just Sharon talking. This is you saying, yeah, I've experienced these things and I'm ready to change.
Yeah, you helped me discover like 3 things about myself through this conversation, and I always learn more about myself when I have conversations with you. So selfishly, I love having you on the show so we can go an hour into it, and I'm excited to have you back for a 3rd time as well, Sharon. So thank you very
Thank
much for
you.
being here. Thank you for your friendship, your conversation, and most importantly, thanks for your time today.
Likewise, thank you for all saying back to you.
This has been a full conversation, and Sharon definitely opened my eyes on different things that I can both work on, but also things that I can do differently in terms of what brings me joy, why it is I do what I do, whether what I'm believing, the stories that I'm telling myself, whether they're true or not. And as well as I hope it opened your eyes to what it is you do on a daily basis. What is it that brings you joy? What are the stories that you may be telling yourself? Not maybe, but what are the stories that you tell yourself? And how can you tell yourself a different story and morph the original into one that truly serves you in living a better life, as well as releasing that stress that you may be carrying around with you that you might not even be conscious of. And if that is the case, then you need to go check out Sharon's Blueprint for Stress Release. It's blueprintforstressrelease.com. You can also find Sharon at isittrue.com. And you got to go follow her. I'm going to have her social profiles below in the description. Her LinkedIn's down there. That's where I originally connected with Sharon. And she's just a delightful human being who I love having conversations with. If you love this conversation, please share this show with just one other person who could use it as well. We didn't run any ads. We didn't run sponsors. That's because we just want to have the conversation and not interrupt the experience for you. Thanks for being the best part of the Be Better team, and thank you for tuning in. Until next time, continue to be better.